Learning the painfully hard combat, dying to the same mini-boss a dozen times, and wanting to punch your monitor after failing to beat Isshin, that is obviously none other than Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro won Game of the Year 2019 because it's an absolute FromSoftware masterpiece. But what makes it so special? Will there ever be another game to reach its level? And most importantly, why is Sekiro better than Elden Ring? Well, it's time to find out. And there's a few mind-blowing aspects that out of all Souls games only exist in Sekiro. But the most important feature that defines the quality of any Soulsborne title, and the main reason why Sekiro stands out so much from the rest of its competitors, is the combat. The combat mechanic in Sekiro, just as IGN said, is skill-based swordsmanship that requires a mastery of an excellent new countering system. To translate that to English, basically the sword-to-sword fighting in Sekiro has a massive learning curve, especially for those who are new to Souls games. But after dying hundreds of times and once you learn to perfect your timing when parrying, Sekiro's fighting becomes by far the most satisfying and rewarding feature in the game. But what makes Sekiro's combat so hard to learn and even harder to master? Well, there's the incredibly varied windows of attack, which often can be super narrow, and the only way to actually nail them is by simply playing and failing. That's how you activate your muscle memory, and your reaction time in a fight won't be worse than those of my 80-year-old grandma. Besides that, there's a bunch of different attacks, like thrusts, sweeps, and grabs, that you can do on enemies as well as the other way around. So remember, thrust attacks must be deflected, sweeps must be blocked or jumped over, and grabs must be step dodged depending on the size and enemy type. Wait, you thought it was this easy? It gets way deeper than this. Pause. But in Sekiro, there's more ways to beat your enemies than doing raw damage. And because of this system, combat in Sekiro is one of the most intense and cinematic experiences that I've had in any game ever. The system I'm referring to is called posture. Both you and the enemies have a posture bar, just like your health bar. And the more you attack the enemy while they block, the more you're degrading their posture, to the point where you fully break it and make the enemy open to a death blow. Being toe-to-toe with your enemy, deflecting their attack, then cutting them with a quick slash to break their posture and finish them off with a death blow is insanely satisfying. And once you actually get good at it, sword fights in other games will not even come close to those in Sekiro. Okay, so Sekiro does have a challenging and rewarding combat system, but how does that make it the best Souls game? Because Bloodborne, for example, has good combat as well as other Soulsborne titles. Well, if you thought this is where it ends, you're completely wrong. Because Sekiro has something that other Souls games simply do not have, and that is forgiveness.
CJ, what the does that mean?
I'm glad you asked. Forgiveness means that Sekiro gives players a second chance after death. Hence the title of the game, Shadows Die Twice. And you'd think that,
hey, this boss just killed me once, but I can resurrect myself and have a much better shot at beating it now.
But that's not always the case. Because even though you're able to resurrect yourself after dying once, at the end of the day, this is a FromSoftware game, and coming back to life after being absolutely smacked in the face by an enemy comes with a price. So every time you die, you basically lose half of the experience and currency you've collected, which makes reviving yourself a matter of real decision making, depending on how low you brought the boss's health to, how much supplies you have, and just realizing that you're simply not prepared for that boss fight yet, aka you're just at the game. But mind you, all of this is nowhere near as bad as losing all of your souls in Dark Souls 3 or ruins in Elden Ring after every single death, besides losing your temper, of course. But speaking of Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and all other Souls games in general, they are not even close to Sekiro's level. And I stand on business when I say this, because there's a key element that Sekiro does so much better than the rest of the competition, and that element is called variety. Yes, you heard that right, and you may ask,
CJ, but variety in what?
Variety in everything. Sekiro is a linear game, and despite it not being open world and having only a few paths to venture out to, the variety of levels and how well they're designed is actually insane. In Sekiro, you don't have those big areas like Limgrave in Elden Ring. Instead, the game focuses more on the verticality of the areas, and this benefits the player a lot. Because unlike previous Soulsborne games where your character feels stuck to the ground while walking and slowly climbing ladders, for example, in Sekiro you can be way more flexible. And that makes the feeling of being circled, cornered, or overwhelmed non-existent in this game. Because whenever you'd get in trouble, there was always a way out by grappling onto a higher surface like a rooftop. In Sekiro, you have to think like a ninja, not a knight. And speaking of thinking like a ninja, another reason why Sekiro is levels above the rest of the Souls games is stealth. Thanks to the small yet well-made environment, Sekiro focuses a lot more on being sneaky with it. And this approach adds a whole new layer to the game, because it encourages you to think about how to enter a situation and who to take out first. And trust me, you'd be surprised by how many ways you can actually be stealthy in this game. Firstly, the environment is your best friend, because you can easily hide by hanging onto a ledge, clinging tightly to walls, and hiding in tall grass or under buildings. It's also usually worth it to grapple to high ground and take note of any landmarks that could potentially help you go unseen through a territory of enemies. Not to mention that by doing this, you can also spot a bunch of shortcuts within the game. It's genuinely impressive how many shortcuts there are to be discovered in Sekiro. While traveling through an area or observing it from high ground, it's extremely important to keep an eye out for any branches or nearby ledges that you can grapple to, as these could lead you to the back of a tough enemy that's blocking the way, and this is especially helpful for mini-bosses that are a pain in the to deal with. Besides utilizing the environment to your advantage, there's also items like Gashin's sugar that literally suppresses the sounds you make and conceals your presence for up to 30 seconds, which might not sound like a lot, but if you want to be a ninja in Sekiro, you have to think, act, and stay composed. So trust me, those 30 seconds are more than enough to sneak up on beefier mini-bosses that have 2 health bars. On top of that, you can also utilize skills to help you stay stealthy in Sekiro, and there's a reason why skills are so important in this game, which I'm gonna cover in a second, but for now, there's skills like Suppress Presence, which reduces an enemy's ability to see you while you're crouched, hidden in foliage, or clinging to ledges. And of course, we can't forget about the Blood Smoke Ninjutsu skill, which when equipped creates a cloud of red smoke after an execution. And for one, that's oddly satisfying to pull off, and second, it helps you regain the element of surprise on the enemy by re-entering stealth for a small period of time. Another ninjutsu skill is called Puppeteer Ninjutsu, which is really good for sneaking around high populated areas. With this skill, you can literally become a damn Jedi by manipulating enemies to attack each other in the immediate area, causing a massive diversion and giving you the chance to either sneak in or out of any nasty scenario. And since we're on the topic of skills, this is one of the main reasons why Sekiro is, in fact, better than Elden Ring.
But CJ, how do skills make Sekiro better than Elden Ring?
Well, they don't. Not directly, at least. Let me explain. So in Elden Ring, the way you progress and get better is by killing enemies/bosses, getting runes and using the runes to either upgrade your attributes or upgrade your weapons, which can also be bought with runes or found in-game. On the other hand, in Sekiro, the only weapon you can have is your katana, and you have that trustworthy katana all throughout the game. And no, you can't upgrade it, you can't upgrade your character's attributes, and you certainly cannot find any pieces of armor within the game, unlike Elden Ring. So what I'm really trying to say is that Sekiro puts emphasis on getting better with what you can do rather than looking for another weapon or piece of armor. In other words, Sekiro is based a lot more on skill rather than having OP weapons served up on a silver plate, OP builds that you can absolutely abuse even the hardest bosses with, and the ridiculous cheeses and glitches you can do to simply avoid enemies altogether. together. This is why Sekiro is and will always be better than Elden Ring. In Sekiro, when you first go eye to eye with Genichiro, for example, and he absolutely demolishes you, you can't just go farm currency, upgrade your attributes to the max, and come back, and surely you can't just go find that weapon that you can upgrade and one-shot Genichiro with. It simply doesn't work like that. In Sekiro, when you keep dying to a tough boss like Genichiro or Isshin, the only way to actually get better is by simply playing. You have to keep dying from that one boss to learn his attack patterns, know when and how to strike, find those open spots to get a few hits in, or most importantly, figure out how to even address the boss fight. Because some bosses in Sekiro have beefy health bars and others are just too fast. So in that case, it would be better to destroy the boss's posture rather than finding those open spots.
But CJ, we don't believe you until you show proof.
You guys want proof, huh? Well, since I just mentioned him, let's take Genichiro for example. He's by far the most popular and one of the hardest bosses in Sekiro, besides Isshin of course. But Genichiro, for the vast majority of players, when you first go against him, he seems impossible to beat. His attacks are very unpredictable, and it feels like every time you find an opening to hit him, he quickly blocks it. Not to mention that stupid bow he uses every time you try and get some distance from him to heal up. He literally shoots arrows at you right when you're drinking the damn potion. Every Souls game player who's played Sekiro probably relates to what I just described. But how do you beat Genichiro? It's actually very simple. You spend a lot of tries simply just blocking, running from him, and observing his moves. And after that, you realize that there's a few attacks he does that if you step dodge to the side, you can actually get 3 hits in while he's got his back turned. And after a few more tries, you realize that another one of his moves is counterable, which allows you to get more hits in. After even more tries, you realize that you can counter another one of his slash attacks simply by jumping, which allows you to get another hit in. And just like that, you slowly but surely learn the boss and finally beat him. Well, that's until you get to Genichiro's third phase, where he literally turns into Thor and you die because you've got no idea how to counter his lightning strikes. All jokes aside though, that's just one example how Sekiro goes about its toughest bosses. And personally, after beating Sekiro multiple times, I literally go and fight Genichiro just for fun now. He's so fun to fight once you learn his moves, and the boss fight literally turns into a damn samurai movie. That's how satisfying and cinematic the combat can get once you master the movement and timing of a specific boss. Yeah, the learning curve is big, and it's not for everyone, but if you have the dedication and patience to actually learn and get better at this game, trust me when I say that you'll feel like a badass. And that is exactly why Sekiro is better than Elden Ring and the best Souls game of all time for that matter. Because in Sekiro you don't become the best by acquiring a weapon or piece of armor. Sekiro makes you learn how to be a badass by failing and allowing you to get familiar with the game the more you play. And if you ask me, that feels way more satisfying than Elden Ring's progression. Now, obviously Sekiro is based on skill, but I did lie to you guys. Cause it's not just you and the katana.
CJ, how could you?
I mean, hold on a minute, don't get me wrong, that is mostly the case. But there's an inventive and really cool way in which Sekiro rewards players for exploration and mirrors that feeling of getting new weapons and pieces of armor. And that is the concept of the prosthetic arm. So in Sekiro, you've got your katana in your right arm, and in your left arm you've got a prosthetic which can actually be equipped with a lot of different gadgets. And these gadgets must be first found in the world and then upgraded. This is another solid reason why Sekiro has a 1-up on Elden Ring, because in Elden Ring there is a ton of weapons to choose from since the scale of the map is way larger. And don't get me wrong, that can be a great thing, but when you're literally 30 minutes into the game and you've got 50 different weapons to make OP builds with, it kinda ruins the fun for me. In Sekiro, on the other hand, these prosthetic gadgets that you find each serve a specific purpose and help you with certain things, without turning you into God himself, of course. Take the firecrackers for example. They're really helpful when you go against a pack of wolves, a mini-boss who's who's mounted on a horse, or that bull that literally took me ages to beat, before I figured out that firecrackers are its weakness. Or the flamethrower tool, which by the name is pretty self-explanatory. And there's a bunch of mini-bosses who are weak to fire, so using this gadget against them can easily open them up for a few hits, since it does more damage over time, which is great for bosses with beefy health bars. And it goes way deeper than this. Pause again on deep. But coming from someone who didn't really rely much on gadgets to go through Sekiro, I can't stress enough how important they are in combat. They won't make you one-shot any boss, but they will change your approach on most bosses, because once you've got a prosthetic tool that makes a boss weak, your whole strategy changes. And they definitely add that flair to any fight if you wanna spice it up a little. But hold on, it gets even more detailed than this. You see, prosthetic tools in Sekiro generally divide into two categories. There's the tools that you use for defense and the tools you use for offense. One of the best defense tools in the game is definitely the umbrella prosthetic, which, let me tell you, is an absolute game changer. Because for one, it can literally shut down grabs and elemental attacks that would otherwise have no counter. It can follow up with projected force for a nice bit of damage at no extra cost, and above all, it legit helps you doing what you're already doing with a katana, and that is deflecting attacks that would be harder to deflect with the katana itself, and attacks that could knock you back, so it's fair to say that the umbrella is a must-have. Another really useful prosthetic tool for defense is the Mist Raven Feather, which flat out lets you phase through enemy attacks and you can reappear next to, behind, or above enemies to make some distance from the enemy's powerful attacks, or just gain that advantage when you're in a nasty scenario. But if we talk about offensive prosthetic tools, there is a whole lot more, and each of them are useful in their own way. Take a look at the Shuriken, for example, which are really effective for doing long-range damage, and they're also low cost, so you can use them a lot of times. Not to mention the loaded spear tool, which is great for pulling weaker enemies closer to you and reduce that distance between you and an enemy. Or the loaded axe tool, which makes dealing with shields a whole lot easier, and it also does a lot of damage to an enemy's posture. And remember when we talked about ways of being stealthy in Sekiro? Well, there's a prosthetic tool that helps you with just that, and it's called Divine Abduction. With this gadget, you can make a wind cover that hides you from enemies and even spirit some of them away. At least that's what the wiki says. But to the better understanding of everyone, you can use Divine Abduction to regain that element of surprise on enemies and go back to stealth mode. But wait, you thought this is where it stops? Well, you're wrong. Cause there's something that Sekiro does with prosthetic tools to make them even more interesting. And that something is called upgrades. You see, each prosthetic tool in Sekiro has its own upgrade tree that requires precious resources to build into. But, and the big but, these upgrade trees, if developed correctly, can make prosthetic tools much more stronger and overall better than their original form.
But CJ, how does that work?
Good question. Let's take the loaded umbrella tool that we talked about previously. By default, this gadget is still really damn good, but when you finally upgrade it to protect you from damage that causes terror, which if taken too much can literally kill you in an instant, the umbrella becomes a game changer. And especially in late game when there's more enemies that can do terror damage, this is really useful and it keeps you from putting a hole through your monitor after raging too much. Speaking from experience here. But you get the point, it will cost you a lot of resources, but when you finally end up building some of these prosthetic gadgets to tier 2, 3, and then combine them with unlockable skills, they become absolutely insane in a way that not only lets you be more flexible with enemies, but it also makes the combat a whole lot more fun, since there's a bunch of attack combos between skills, abilities, and prosthetic tools that you can come up with. But speaking of skills, we talked about them as possible ways of being sneaky. I even mentioned them now, and if you remember, I also said this. On top of that, you can also utilize skills to help you stay stealthy in Sekiro, and there's a reason why skills are so important in this game, which I'm gonna cover in a second. But why do they keep coming up in this video? Well, that's because skills are by far the most essential aspect of Sekiro. So important, in fact, that they differentiate Sekiro from Elden Ring and other Souls games. You see, in Elden Ring you've got a ton of attributes that can be upgraded and easily maxed out with runes. I say easily because of the rune farming methods, but in Sekiro you do not have that. There's no strength, dexterity or arcane to upgrade, you just have vitality and attack power, which you can upgrade by spending key items that you get after defeating certain bosses, and there's a limited number of them too. Instead of buying attribute points, in Sekiro the experience you get from defeating enemies and bosses transforms into skill points, which you can then use to unlock a massive skill tree that allows you to become a true badass by learning specific abilities. Just like prosthetic tools, there's skills that help you on defense and offense. A great defensive skill, for example, is the one that gives you more potent stealth, making assassinations way easier, not to mention the skill that lets you carry more spirit emblems, which allows you to use prosthetic tools more often, or by far my favorite skill in the game, the one that regains some of your health after doing a death blow, which isn't really considered a defense skill, but it's still passive. But if we talk about offensive skills, oh boy, there is a lot. From incredibly fast slashes, to strikes that can immediately destroy an enemy's posture, to special techniques that can kill in the blink of an eye, and much more. There's a massive number of combat abilities, techniques, and skills to acquire in Sekiro, and each of them are unique in their own way. We answered a lot of questions regarding Sekiro today, but what about the story? Is it any good? Well, as much as Sekiro stands out as a Souls game because of how straightforward and linear it is, at the end of the day you can still feel that FromSoftware touch. The story is somewhat more open to players, but it doesn't give you too much, so it keeps you engaged and wanting to know more, which is what FromSoftware is known for doing in all of its games. But hold on, before you go to the comments to say,
"Oh my god, this guy's glazing Sekiro so much,"
that is not the case at all. Sekiro is mine and many other people's favorite Souls game, and for good reason too. But Elden Ring is still in the top 3 best Souls games of all time, and I'll fight over this if I need to. But that's a story for another video. Speaking of Elden Ring though, if you wanna find out if it's actually harder than the famous Dark Souls 3, don't hesitate to click on this video. Have a great rest of your day and see you in the next one. Peace!